Well, this Ask Energy question comes from James, and James is wondering if he has to eat carbohydrates during every single exercise or training session. Great question, James. Easy answer is probably not, but not sure. Let me get into this a little bit, but first let me just remind you, I devoted an entire chapter for nutrient timing in my new 3rd edition book. So you can pick this up either on the eNRG website, Energy Performance website, or just go on Amazon. You can find it there. Okay. It will go into much more detail than what I'm going to describe right now because for the sake of time, I could literally talk about this for at least a few hours. Okay, so if we're talking about carbohydrate needs during exercise, there's a couple things we need to think about first. The first thing is, what kind of daily nutrition plan do you follow right now? So if you are following more of a metabolically efficient nutrition plan, where you're optimizing your blood sugar, you're balancing your carbs, your protein, your fat, and you're very stable with your blood sugar, that will require less carbohydrates or fewer carbohydrates per hour during exercise because your body is more efficient in using its stored fat as energy up to a certain intensity of exercise. Okay. Now, the flip-flop also exists. If you are not controlling your blood sugar that well, so you're more metabolically inefficient or eating a little bit more carbohydrate, not enough protein, not enough fat, you're constantly using your stored carbohydrates for energy. Now, remember, we don't have a lot of carbohydrates stored in our body, probably enough to probably give us about 2 to 2.5 hours worth of moderate intense exercise. So if you're eating a higher carbohydrate daily nutrition plan, you're actually burning your carbohydrates in your muscles much faster, which means you need to eat more carbohydrates. Okay, so we need to take 2 routes here. If you are eating more of a higher carbohydrate-rich daily nutrition plan, you absolutely need a little bit more carbohydrates during exercise, and the opposite is true. Okay, the next step here is, how long is the exercise session or training session? So rule of thumb is usually if it's under about 2 hours, you probably don't need to eat carbohydrates. Now, there are a lot of it depends here. What time of the day? What's the purpose of the session? Is it high intensity, moderate intensity, low intensity? Totally get that, right? But for the most part, if it is under 2 hours, you are likely not needing carbohydrates during that session unless it is a higher intensity session or it's first thing in the morning where you are just waking up and then you go exercise, you go train. Okay. So let me talk about both of those. The first one is pretty easy because I alluded to it a little bit earlier. When you introduce higher intensity exercise, even if it's under 2 hours, you need to fuel your body with carbohydrate during. Usually not a lot because the duration is shorter, but you still need to feed. Okay. Now, the other example is if you're waking up early in the morning and doing a session that's under 2 hours, but is high intensity, you still need to feed. Now, you can feed before, which means you don't necessarily have to feed during, or you can just feed carbohydrates during. Now, my recommendation if you're going to do high intensity exercise and you're feeding carbohydrates is do fluids or do liquid sources first, because those will digest a lot faster and not sit in your stomach. So if it's high intensity exercise under 2 hours, look to fueling your body with liquid sources or maybe like semi-solid sources of carbohydrate, like a gel, a syrup, a gummy, something like that. Now, how much is the question of the hour? Current research indicates that you should consume 30 to 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour. Now, obviously, that's a huge range. If you are able to have your metabolic efficiency measured, some performance tests or some performance centers will actually do that around the world. I do that here with Energy Performance in Colorado. You can come visit me. Great, fantastic. One of the points of that test is actually to determine how many calories your body needs, your individual body, based on your physiology. If you don't have that test done, you have to guess. You have to be somewhere in the range of 30 to 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour. What I would recommend is, if you're starting to experiment, is start on the low end first, because you can always go up. I just see a lot of athletes starting a little bit higher and they get GI distress symptoms, bloating, gas, stuff like that. Start on the lower end. Start at that 30 grams an hour first and just see how your body responds to it. Okay. All right, the other thing we need to talk about, so we talked about under 2 hours, right? If it's over 2 hours, so if you're exercising for over 2 hours, remember, you probably will need carbohydrates because you only have about 2 to 2.5 hours worth of carbohydrate stores to give you or to last to that amount of exercise or that duration of exercise, right? So over about 2.5 hours, you should absolutely fuel your body with some type of carbohydrates. And that's a whole nother topic for another Ask Energy, because there are different types of carbohydrates, especially with all these new products coming on the market thanks to technology. Not going to talk about that here, but if you'd like to know what types of carbohydrates to eat, just send me that question. Love to answer that. Okay, but anyway, back to my point. If it's over 2.5 hours, yes, you should feed your body with some type of carbohydrates, probably at that rate, more so of that 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour. But again, here's the thing I want to talk about regarding the amount of carbohydrate. That 30 to 90 grams per hour, that's kind of, if you think of a bell-shaped curve, that's the bell-shaped curve. That's right in the middle. That's the standard, right? There will be some people who are outliers to this. Absolutely, right? There will be some people who don't need 30 grams of carbohydrate per hour, and there will be people who need more than 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour. So those people exist, absolutely, but most of us will fall somewhere between the 30 to 90 grams per hour. And again, some of this depends on actually a lot of different things. One is your sport. Two is your training cycle and the season that you're in. Three is your metabolic efficiency, right? How well you are at using your fat stores versus carbohydrate stores. And then really looking at four, like, what are you normally doing with your nutrient timing plan, right? And then, of course, looking at the sport that you do. Are you a runner? Do you have to carry this stuff? Are you a cyclist? Where do you put all this? Are you a triathlete? Are you taping things on your bike? Are you using aid station or drop bags, right? So there are a lot of what ifs there. But back to the initial question, do I need to eat carbohydrate during exercise? Really, the answer is most likely, but you need to kind of get to the bottom of the how long will the session be? What is the goal of this session? Is it high intensity threshold, or is it more zone one, zone two aerobic building? Oh, and what are you trying to accomplish? Like, what is the goal of the workout from a physiological standpoint, right? So, as an example, if you're doing a 1 hour, 1 hour and a half run or bike ride or something in zone two, and the whole point is to have endurance, to kind of build endurance, build that endurance capacity, focus on aerobic, really using that intensity to improve the mitochondrial capacity for burning fat. I would argue it during that session, you may not need any carbohydrates, right? So there's a lot of it depends here, but I think I've given you a little bit to work with, James, where you could actually use this information and say, hey, now I've got a good handle on it. Now I need to determine what training cycle I'm in, how I normally eat, if I'm more or less metabolically efficient, and what my sessions are actually, what are the goals of the session and the duration of the sessions. Okay, James, thanks so much for your question. I look forward to the next one.